Thank you, sir. Mr. Saikrishna Budamgunta, founder of Saptang Labs, kindly join us. I would also like to call upon Dr. Pavan Duggal, Advocate, Supreme Court of India, Chairman, International Commission on Cybersecurity Law. Mr. L.C. We do not have Mr. L.C. Mangal, and to chair this whole event and to moderate this particular session, I would also like to call upon Colonel K.V. Kuber, Director of Ernst & Young. Thank you so much for joining. Colonel K.V. Kuber, I let you take care of the session.
Chairman, sir, esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a rookie on the panel, so you'll have to forgive me for my lack of knowledge of either space or outer space or either. All that I can say is what Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Panchabhutani Mahabaho. He says Panchabhutani, these are the 5 great elements. And of the 5 great elements, water, fire, air, land, the greatest is ether. And we are going to talk about one of the Panchabhutanis that Lord Krishna elucidated in the Bhagavad Gita, urging Arjuna to have a mastery over the Panchabhutani. And that is how, when you exclude the ahamkaram, or the ego from the associated material world, that is when you gain the mastery. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking in the next about 1 hour on protecting space capabilities and a cyber security framework. So the question is, why is it important to protect space? So we have states that are rogue states, and then we have threats that are affecting this either. And also we have the non-state actors. And we know that the threat can be kinetic, non-kinetic, and so we're going to discuss a few of them. And we're going to see as to how we are going to bring about the whole session for you with the right framework that we want to bring out, and the right lessons and some takeaways that we want to give you here. I just want to give a small example of US Air Force and the US DoD. The US DoD ran a defense digital service, ran a competition intended to spur interest in the aerospace cybersecurity. The challenge was called HackerSat, and the hackers were able to take control of a satellite. While it was a controlled event, the hackers demonstrated why protecting space-based assets from cyber threats needs to be a new priority. The purpose of targeting satellites would be an attempt to disrupt communications, information streams vital for communication security and for commerce. China is one of the countries that is leading as a nation state with such capabilities, and they can do a cyber attack with impunity, is what I believe. So we are going to try to tell as to what will be the key takeaways, what would make us all comfortable to put about a thought-provoking session today. Which are the other countries, what do they do, and what should be the short-term, long-term goals. And ladies and gentlemen, cyberspace weapons are here today. Countries have openly talked about fixed site and mobile laser systems that can be used to target foreign optical imaging satellites flying over their territories. If they wanted to blind overhead satellites that rely upon electro-optical cameras, they'll be able to do it with mobile systems too. So I will not go into too much of a prelude. I've been told that we have to conclude the session by 4 p.m. and therefore, without much ado, I'll request our session chairman. Sir, would you like to give your opening remarks, please? Dr. Gulshan Rai. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Gulshan Rai.
Dr. Chetwani, Colonel Kuber, my very good friend, Mr. Saikrishna, and Mr. Pavan Duggal, Advocate, Supreme Court of India. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you. I'm sure now you must be feeling a bit relaxed after the lunch, listening from since morning there. But friends, this subject is a very, very interesting subject, and the session is equally interesting. I'm sure many of you would recall one of the incident in the Russian-Ukraine war, where news flashed that more than 200,000 terminals across number of countries, space terminal, satellite terminal across the few countries, they stopped functioning because the satellite issues came up. And the satellite they stopped functioning there, satellite was diverted, there was problem came up in the satellite providing the internet communications there. And then Elon Musk installed couple of lakh terminals from the SpaceX in the entire Ukraine to provide the reliable communication as well as the internet facilities. I used to go to many think tanks and they used to say, all you talk about cyber hype there, nothing happens in Ukraine. Everything is functioning fine. And then this news of what I said, it came down, friends, there. Then I remember that people used to say, cyber is the fifth domain, apart from your air, land, space, as well as the sea. All the other four domains are natural, but the fifth domain is an artificial domain. Lot more complexities are coming up in this cyber domain, and it is the one domain which is controlling all the four domains. That's a part of it. All the four domains, you need the fifth domain to control it. And this fifth domain spreads across, as I said, it controls all the four domains. It spreads across the entire universe there. In a space, you have a satellite. They're all talking about the digital communication. All digital systems are there, or cyber systems are there. You are controlling the entire coordinates of the satellite. Those satellites are being controlled by the ground station, which is again a cyber system, linked with the internet to different places there. There may not be a 5G kind of a communication there. There could be a proprietary modulation in the communication through all encrypted from space to the ground station and elsewhere. But there is electronics, there are certain digital electronics there, and there are a whole lot of softwares which are being running the satellite, the master station and other terminals there. Everywhere there is a software. Everything is becoming a next generation kind of a software, next generation kind of a cyber systems there. And friends, wherever there is a software, we all talk about the transponder. It's a software which controls there. Wherever, friend, there is a software, the security issues become very, very predominant. Ultimately, it's a program. You write in whatever language you write it. It may be Java, it may be assembly language, it may be whatever language you write it there. It's a list of instructions, and if you change one instructions, you can bring the different kind of impact. You can change the azimuth of the satellite system. You can corrupt the entire ground station, and the ground station, when it gets corrupt, it can change the entire orientation of satellite there. How the attacks are happening there. And one of the country I won't name, a couple of years ago, I am witness to that technology. They use the satellite kind of a connectivity to hack into the ground system, not in the satellite ground systems, but the entire computer system, ICT system in the world. That's a scenario which we are talking about it. So when we talk about the space technology, it is slowly moving to the open standards, where the natural or the not natural, but the conventional systems which are used for data processing or communication, they are playing the role. It's all space technology is built on the general purpose systems there, and you know the general purpose systems are amenable to issues there, and therefore the entire space system gets amenable to the risk which this session is now going to discuss there. In a way, it's a very, very important session because the things have started coming, and we have seen, as I said, the examples in the Ukraine-Russia war. Friends, many of the stories, you would have read it, many of the stories about this war has not come out. But in time to come, you will all learn this is a unique kind of a war where many things happen. International treaties have been broken, agreements have been broken. I know Pavan has been very much involved in the UNGG norms of cyber behavior. After 18 years, there came some agreement to that. That also has gone haywire. Nobody will follow that. And therefore, the security is becoming an issue, very, very serious issue in the digital transformation now which we are witnessing or which we have entered. In fact, some of my friends said, don't talk about the digital transformation, talk about the transformation in the digital technology. That's what he said. It's a transforming, the digital technology itself is being transferred there. And I was reading yesterday, an article was published in the Harvard. The metaverse is going to be a boon for the cyber criminal or the cyber hacker or the such kind of a adversaries for cyber perpetrators. So we are in a very challenging scenario. We have moved in a very challenging kind of a situation where we have to use technology, and it's a time that we must understand what are the pitfalls of the technology, how do we address the technology. And in this regard, I congratulate my friend Anil as well as the Indian Space Congress to focus this issue, because the 26, 27, you have been focusing different parts of the cyber program, cyberspace. Space, you are focusing, they are focusing their different technology, different aspect, rules, regulation, law is being focused there. And this subject also now has come to the attention for them, and more such programs are needed, more such sessions are needed, so that we bring lot more awareness while designing the spacecraft or designing separate systems there. And all of you know that India is also in the process, they have taken a lot of initiative to allow the private parties to enter into the space program. So the monopoly of the Department of Space is getting diluted over a period of a time. So, so all those things require that we must understand the pitfall, and we must be ready to handle or deal with such kind of a technological innovations and the transformation. With this, I hand over to the Mr. Chetwani, our moderator, and I welcome once again my old panelists who are legend in their own area, they are expert in their own areas, and beautiful panel. Mr. Pavan Duggal is an acknowledged lawyer of the Supreme Court who has been working with the law, technology law for almost 25 years. 25 years. Saikrishna is a great expert when you talk about the critical information infrastructure and in the technology itself. He is a legend in his own sense there. Mr. Chetwani is acknowledged, he's working Department of Space, so I think there is no one better than in this forum today who understands this space and link with the technology space. And he will tell you how much technology is being used in the space. And Mr. Kuber is one of the big four, and I don't think anyone in the world moves without one of the big four there. They bring, assimilate different knowledges there, and I'm sure he's the right choice by the organizer to lead this session. Thank you very much.
That was Dr. Gulshan Rai, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, sir, for those remarks. You talked about the artificial domain. You talked about how the 4 domains will reach the 5th one. And you also talked about transformation in digital technology and certain pitfalls over there. And also you talked about how things were hacked. You talked about open standards. And I think with that type of background setting, the knowledge setting that we have had today, it's my privilege to invite Saikrishna. And before I invite Saikrishna, let me tell you a little bit about him. He runs about 4 companies, and Dr. Gulshan Rai already introduced him to all of you. And what I want you to talk, Sai, is, we talk about all this RF and computer science and, space and VSATs and, disasters. Then we talk about CMI. Can you just give your opening remarks around these so that, we can have a more informed discussion? Up to you. Please, sir, onto the stage.
Thanks, sir. Thanks to Gulshan Rai, sir, for a generous introduction. So I'll try to be brief and try to cover the topic like our chair has expressed. So space has become, like Gulshan Rai, sir, has said, it's the 5th dimension now, along with the cyber, So space is one of the very important components of the critical information infrastructure. Now, who defines what is a critical information infrastructure? The requirements of the country. So what does the country's requirement says? If any information infrastructure, destruction or any attack on it, or a debilitating impact on national security, economy, or health. Now imagine the components of space that are relevant to our economy, that are relevant to our health, that are relevant to our law and order. Now, we discussed in the morning too. So space is an extremely critical component in the way we communicate with each other, in the way we also collect information about environment and other things. So any attack on space infrastructure will be a major attack for the country. Now, I'm not talking about the defense requirements. Now, we all know we have a concept of network-centric warfare, where communication, constant visibility of the war battlefield is essential. Now, all of that is again at a huge risk when there is an attack on the space infrastructure. Like the history has proven, space infrastructure is very, very vulnerable for attack. It has a very large attack surface, because we all know in this, at least in this room, building a space infrastructure is extremely complex. It has multiple facets, multiple angles. We talk about building sensors. We talk about building sensors which survive in the outside the atmosphere. So we need totally different type of processors, totally different type of software writing, totally different type of integrations, and protecting that infrastructure from space and all this. And you can't physically go and replace it, so you need to keep a communication channel to control it. Now that is extremely complex. Now building as such this infrastructure is complex, and there is not much of testing that is done on this infrastructure, because not many people use it. So it is quite unlike any other application that you use. So this is another second level of challenge that we have, which is exactly why building a very, very secure cybersecurity framework right from the beginning is extremely critical to secure this infrastructure. And like what Dr. Gulshan Rai sir has said, private sector participation in the space infrastructure is increasing rapidly. And every asset that the private sector would build will be subjected to this audit. Because like we all talked in the earlier session too, space infrastructure will eventually be a dual use. So there is an absolute necessity that the state or the secure defense establishment would take an active interest in auditing and vetting your infrastructure that you've built for controlling your satellites. It will start from firmware audit to the top level infrastructure audit. So all these angles have to be taken over. And when we talk of the last point, like Sir has said, when look at events like how an adversary attack on our infrastructure would materialize, it would materialize simply in the cyberspace. The takeover of fourth dimension will happen through the fifth dimension. So that is the opening remarks. I think, sir, with that, I'll get back to you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sai, for that opening remarks where you talked about the importance of firmware audit, critical infrastructure that's there, and the sensors, how you put them in outer orbit and all that. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you know, we are all stakeholders in this. It has been mentioned for the last 3 days, satellites have come into our homes. So we are all very much part of this, this whole gambit of space. And the most important stakeholder in this entire scenario will be ISRO as far as India is concerned. And it's my privilege to invite Dr. Rajiv, Ratan, Chetwani to give his opening remarks. So please.
So respected Dr. Gulshan Rai, Shri Pavan, Duggal, Dr. Sai, Dr. Kuber and August gathering here. Good afternoon to all of you. As we all know today that commercialization of low Earth orbit is creating an IT ecosystem which serves many infrastructures, communication, education, transportation. Far more connected devices are there now with the use of IP version 6. Now, the cybersecurity and resiliency of this ecosystem is of paramount importance. Government and industry needs to ensure cybersecurity for this emerging LEO-related infrastructure which is getting created, and the commercial participants. Now, here there is a bit of contradiction. See, industry needs low-cost, affordable implementation of cybersecurity, but cybersecurity as such requires a huge amount of investment. So, how to balance this? How to balance that effective cybersecurity with other factors like cost? That is needs to be discussed, and a solution needs to be worked out. What is the effective approach to ensure the cybersecurity with respect to the economics of the small sats and low Earth orbit related infrastructure? What we talk of is like encryption of command and control at ground as well as in orbit. But when CubeSats are being built by students or the startups, it requires not only investment, but it requires more real estate in the satellite, in the CubeSat, which increases the complexity, it increases the cost, it increases the mass of the satellite to be launched. So there is a tendency to avoid this. But then there is a big danger, because these CubeSats, if malicious actors take control of these satellites, small satellites, student satellites, they can be propelled towards the target. So they can be used as weapons. This is a major issue. So what we need is, we need to work out some best practices, which has to be worked out by government, along with industry, along with legal experts, along with academia. I'll come back to these points in the next round later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chetwani, for that, again, initial remarks. Well, it's always good to have a lawyer on your side. And especially when you have an advocate who's been practicing for more than 3 decades in the Supreme Court on technology-related issues. It's good to hear the advocate first, and therefore, so I think, Dr. Duggal, would you like to? Yeah, please.
Dr. Gulshan Rai, Mr. Moderator, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Some years back, in space, a country was monitoring its satellite. And then suddenly, the links snapped. It was more than 15, 16 hours after a lot of hectic activity was the country able to regain access back on its satellite. What happened in those 16 hours, nobody knows. Obviously, it was taken over by rogue nations, and they were trying to use it for the purposes that they want to do. That's where we currently stand. So, today when I talk about the legal aspects, I find that the world is still in a sleeping mode when we look at the legalities pertaining to cybersecurity in space. Well, it's been now more than a decade since the US declared space to be the next frontier of warfare. But more significantly, from a legal standpoint, I realize nothing has been done. Countries are still in a 1990s mode. They're still relying upon their traditional cyber laws for the purposes of trying to regulate activities in space. Yes, I agree with you. A satellite or any other device that you send up space ultimately would be a communication device. Ultimately would be a computer. So from that broad common denominator, yes, the cyber law would apply. But look at cyber laws globally, and you realize that none of the cyber laws were really drafted keeping in mind the unique requirements of space. So, come on to stage version 2.0, come in the 2010 onwards decade, and I find a flurry of activity amongst countries. China leads the pack, followed by a lot of countries like Singapore, Vietnam, Australia, and the like. And they start coming up with their own dedicated national laws on cybersecurity. And look at China's 3 national laws on cybersecurity, very broad, very comprehensive, and I think could cover a majority of activities that take place in space. So now the new trend is countries are saying, I'm going to apply my national cybersecurity law to things that are happening in space because my domain applies to space. Now that's another very contentious issue. And the beginning of this issue comes from China. China came up with a unique concept of cyber sovereignty, where they said my sovereignty extends not just to my territorial boundaries, but to the entire of internet and space as well. So that means Chinese laws are applicable to activities being done in space. A lot of people are not happy with this, but then everybody is jumping onto the bandwagon. Countries are increasingly now coming up with very broad concepts of cyber sovereignty. Look at the latest example. 1st of October 2022, you find Vietnam actually coming up with new norms under its national cybersecurity law. And that particular law has come up with a unique concept of a national cyberspace, where they say that the entire internet and space is my national cyberspace, and my law applies to the same. So the world over, I find the legal frameworks have not even begun addressing the issues of breaches of cybersecurity in space. Yes, national cybersecurity laws to some extent would be applicable to cybersecurity breaches in space. But expecting your traditional cyber laws to be applicable to space is going to be a far outcry. But more significantly, right now we are entering into a new age of cyber space terrorism. Today, as Mr. Chetwani pointed out, SATs could potentially be used as weapons in their own sense. And how do we regulate that? From a legal standpoint, first of all, whose jurisdiction lies up there? Number 2, can my country's law be applicable there? Number 3, how does my country's law be applicable to acts done by other countries' satellites, which are not within my territorial or my, shall I say, cyber sovereignty umbrella? So huge problems as we go forward. Globally, we are not thinking anything. Look at the Budapest Convention, and you find it's completely silent on any activities of breach of cybersecurity in the context of space. Good news, the United Nations Ad Hoc Committee on Cybercrime is now negotiating an international convention to prevent the misuse of information and communication technologies for criminal purposes. And I've testified before the committee and I've told them, look, you'll have to come up with both provisions to deal with misuse of ICTs in the real world as also in cyberspace and space at large. Let's see how that particular thing evolves. But ultimately, till such time that nothing else happens, countries will be required very quickly to start coming up with the rights, duties and responsibilities of stakeholders in space. But then those are issues of jurisdiction, those are issues of applicability of law and which law to apply. And more significantly, the biggest issue will be of attribution in space. When an attack takes place on my sat in space, how do I attribute this attack to which computer system or which particular cyber actor or which particular state or non-state actor? We don't have the appropriate mechanisms in this regard as well. Further, now space is becoming the next good frontier for commission of various cyber criminal activities. Because when you start targeting space from the dark net, knowing fully well that you're protected in terms of your identity by the intrinsic architecture of the dark net, clearly it's a huge wake-up call for lawmakers. But I find nothing is happening as far as lawmakers are concerned. There's some talk here and there. UNOSA in the United Nations ecosystem is trying to do something, but they still not have yet come to the direction of trying to address the legal issues on cybersecurity. But very quickly, the future of space belongs to protection and preservation in a legal manner of cybersecurity in space. You can call it space security, you can call it mere security, but since ultimately you are using cyber raw materials in the space ecosystem, there will be need for appropriate legal frameworks. Till such time that doesn't happen, we will be in a transient mode. It's hard for me to predict how long will the transient mode be. Will it be another 5 years, 10 years? I don't know. But it's definitely not ending tomorrow morning. So therefore, I think the onus will be on stakeholders to come out of this current traditional mindset of trying to address cybersecurity in space through the national cyber laws. Of course, work needs to be done at a global level, but we are handicapped. We don't have an international cyber law in place. We don't have an international cybersecurity law in place. You have a handful of countries who have only come up with national laws on cybersecurity. You have a couple of dozen countries who have come up with national strategies on cybersecurity. But India, at the time when I talk with you, has nothing in place. We don't have a dedicated law on cybersecurity. The National Cybersecurity Policy 2013 has not been implemented, and we are still waiting for the National Cybersecurity Strategy 2022 as and when it comes across. But clearly, I think conferences like these should be good starting points for lawmakers to start concentrating on the legal, policy, and regulatory issues pertaining to protection and preservation of cybersecurity in space. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that remark when you said world is in a sleeping mode and we need laws and we need protection. But sir, I'm tempted to ask you the first question. When a nation puts a satellite in space, whom does that space belong to?
Well, this is one particular area that there's been some progress. It's very much getting now accepted that space is a global heritage of the common human mankind. It doesn't belong to a particular country. But while this particular is the legal framework or the legal position now, you have countries like China disrupting this ecosystem, where countries are saying, well, in this common heritage, my law applies because my cyber sovereignty is all across space. So this is now the unique, shall I say, catalyst that's being introduced into the dish, which means that it will be a couple of years before this legal proposition gets tested. Because right now, every country is in the Antarctic mode. Remember when Antarctic was first discovered? Every country would send an expedition. They would put their flag on a portion of the Antarctic and say, this is my land, my law applies. Right now, it's a staying stage where we are saying nation states are putting their SATs up in place and say, the moment my SAT hits space, well, the entire space comes within the ambit of my law. Now that, of course, is a very, very untenable situation. We will have to come up with legal frameworks, sir. Right now, it's still by and large accepted that it's a global heritage of the human mankind, but there are great efforts being going on to disturb this status quo. And of course, countries have still not yet officially acknowledged the fact that there are cyber crimes or cyber security breaches happening in space. So currently there's no discussion happening on the need for regulating the same. Thanks.
Thank you for that, sir. So I'm reminded of an example, I just want to draw a recent example of Chinese orbital capabilities in the Shijian 21 satellite that docked with the defunct Beidou spacecraft and tugged it to a graveyard orbit 300 kilometers above the geostationary Earth orbit. China said this was a demonstration of debris removal, not a space weapon. The problem is, when you start to look holistically at a lot of what the Chinese are doing in space, that's where you start really getting worried about these robotic mechanisms that they are utilizing. Are debris just debris, or are we facing a threat over there? Sai, would you like to take a shot at it?
So, sir, the first point that we have to observe and realize is, for China, especially focusing on China, space is basically an ideological component for dominance. They have to dominate space. And there is no debate or discussion on it. Which is exactly why the Chinese space project is a military project. It is not civilian. There's nothing civilian about it. Now, when you see it from this point of view, everything changes. So, just the way in the land, the civilian space accommodates the military space, from the Chinese point of view, in space, military accommodates civilians. Now, which is exactly when you are looking at it from the ideological point of view, everything that is open to interpretation will be used in a manner that favors the Chinese Communist Party. This has been the ideological view and also the practical approach of Chinese in everything they have done. Be it the way they misused the international regulations to dump their items into other economies. So every piece will be used. I think there was a very famous book which was released. It's called Unrestricted Warfare. I'm sure at least some of you would have definitely read that book. So this is their version of unrestricted warfare. So while they quietly take the cover that yes, space is a place for exploration for everyone, as long as it suits them, the moment they have the ability, they'll simply say, the space that is exactly above my territory belongs to me and my law will apply. So this flip-flop of the opinion is something that they are naturally used to. They don't find any contradiction in it. So we have to accept this as a reality. So there will not be any surprises if they use debris, if they create any tool or plant, deploy, use one satellite to destroy another satellite. All of this is show of strength. And this show of strength also has an ideological mindset behind it. So it's like this, when you ask any Naxalite, why do you want to do liberation? They have no answer. They say, we have to do liberation. That's all. We need a revolution. Why do you need a revolution? No clear answer. It's just that we need revolution.
Sai, you talked about unrestricted warfare. And ladies and gentlemen, I just want to tell you that I know we just had lunch and you're looking pretty dull right now, but a few questions from your side will actually activate the entire atmosphere. And while we were at this cat and mouse game that's going on, in geo especially, a recent example has been, we talked about the Xi'an 1201 and 1202 spacecraft that was characterized as inspector satellites. For a period of time, the US Geosynchronous Space Situational Awareness Program, satellites were seemingly getting close to the satellites that you would seem that, they would disperse. And then the Chinese Aerospace Science Corporation launched the Xi'an 1201 and 02 technologically as Pathfinder satellites. And they were successfully placed into a geostationary transfer orbit after launching from the Wenchang Space Launch Center in China. They spent several months in their orbits, and the Long March 7A, a three-stage medium lift launch was also there. in the geostationary transfer orbit. The takeaway is, when you start taking a look at the actions that they are conducting, it's tactics development. It's rendezvous proximity operations. They are starting to show that they are also working on a lot of these. What is it? To do maneuvering to potentially defeat an adversary. I think we have to expect by the turn of the decade that the technology will likely get to a point where they're going to hold satellites in higher orbits, not just in LEO. And for this, I would invite a comment and a little talk from Dr. Chetwani. So, okay. The question is, in the geo today, whether China will dominate geo, that's number one. And secondly, when they place these satellites, the Xi'an 1201 and 02 in the geostationary transfer orbit, and they are conducting all these missions in succession to sort of show tactics development and proximity operations. And the technology is going to probably reach a stage when they're going to hold it in the geo. So what is your view on the whole thing?
So it's not just one country. All the space powers are trying to do the same. And today, in order to defend themselves, to create deterrence, and also in order to cooperate some of the nations. So a lot of this space situational data is being shared between countries. Many countries are sharing this data from the point of view of avoiding any collisions. So that is one is the peaceful use. But then every country is trying to do that. There is nothing special about it. Of course, some countries are better in technology and able to achieve much more. That's what I would say. I don't want to get into specifics because that's not the right place to do it.
Right, sir. Thank you very much. But, ladies and gentlemen, there is a concern over there. And the concern is, are we safe? Are our satellites safe out there? And with such maneuvering taking place in the orbits above us, is there something we need to worry about? Are there certain guidelines that we need to adapt? Is there a framework that probably helps us? Dr. Pavan, would you like to give us some view on this?
Currently, we have a couple of options which we can do. We can obviously look at the common minimum denominators of legal principles which nations are by and large agreeing in terms of applicability to space. And that could be a good starting point for creating an international consensus. As of now, in the context of cybersecurity on space, I see no consensus. I see more an aggressive, belligerent thought process amongst nations that I am going to test my cyber sovereignty against you, my space sovereignty against you. So if you were to take the Chinese example and they say, look, the space over my territory, first and foremost, they don't say that. I look at the 3 national cybersecurity laws of China from 2015 to 2019, and I clearly tell you, the way that's been drafted, it means that the entire space is also as part of amenable to these laws. Now, another thought process by some scholars is, no, it's only the space on top of their territorial boundaries which is going to be amenable to their laws. But hold on, that territorial boundaries are no longer stagnant. The Earth is revolving on its axis, and with each revolution, it's effectively covering up huge chunks of the space. So I see much more, shall I say, dispute coming in, but countries don't appear to be bothered about that. They are prepared for some kind of a long overhaul in terms of a legal action at the International Court of Justice, but then they don't want to miss the opportunity, the train that's come on the platform. And for that particular stuff, currently they're doing everything possible. So if you look at any country, let's look at China. They say my cyber law applies, my cyber security law applies, my cyber sovereignty applies to space, period. So don't even tell me. And some countries are saying, hold on, even it's my sat, even it's my debris that's going, including anywhere in space, that's the entire area where my law is going to be applicable and where my sovereignty will extend to. And that is creating up a Pandora's box. There is still no clarity, though right now this ad hoc committee on cybercrime is now working on a draft language for an international convention. Hopefully they put some parameters, but please understand there's so much of pushback by sovereign nation states on this that nobody wants to have crystal clear legal principles. Why? Because once you have crystal clear legal principles, there's bound to be naming and shaming. Because somewhere down the line, you would be doing some activity which would be covert or overt, which will end up being in violation, and nobody wants to be in that space. So the general thought process amongst nation states and sovereign governments is, let the matter be postponed indefinitely. But I don't think that's going to happen. All it's going to take is one cyber or one space emergency for countries to wake up. Maybe a blast, maybe a collusion, maybe some kind of a space incident that countries will suddenly start waking up to say, hold on, hey guys, we require norms of behavior, not just in cyberspace, but also in space. And therefore, we need to work on this. If it takes a United Nations group of governmental experts 15 years to come to the basic conclusion that rules of international law are applicable to space, to cyberspace, it's a logical corollary that rules of international law should also automatically apply to space as well, considering that space is a common heritage of human mankind as a whole. But countries still don't want to go that far ahead, and logically so. Everybody is building up their arsenals for potential activities in space tomorrow, so it's all a show of strength. It's all trying to gather as much leverage that you can at a time when the rules are not very clear. And by the time the rules start getting clear, it's going to be at least about 7-8 years to a decade before we start getting more clarity. Till such time, it'll be national states relying upon national laws, national legal concepts for the purposes of their interpretation of how legal principles would be applicable in space. Thanks.
Absolutely, sir, absolutely. I think you've got the nail on the head. And, this is a very interesting thing. And we were thinking that, in retaliation to the accidental bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, what China did was, the first thing that they did was that they conducted a cyber attack against the US government websites. And so, there is a significant capability since then, and probably cyber attacks will be the first salvo that will be fired. But then, Sai, I want to kindle your mind a little bit on this. Firstly, talking about this cyber attacks that will be fired, that's okay. But also, China reportedly tested a fractional orbital bombardment system, FOBS, combined with a hypersonic glide vehicle, setting off alarms that this could give China a strategic advantage. Although China denied it, that it was testing an FOBS, what stood out was that the glider traveled 40,000 kilometers and it completed 100 minutes of flight time. These are both records for the Chinese. It was considered to be a successful test. The concern here, Sai, is what comes next in this evolution. Imagine a world where you have something that is able to stay in orbit and has a payload that's able to be released whenever they desire, or at least at a minimum to be used as a deterrent. So, what are your views on this?
Sir, I'll try to answer this from the two point of views. The first one, I'll try to answer it from the cyber point of view. Let's see it from the point of view of a cyber attack which will enable an act like this. Now, what if your satellites suddenly go blind? I'm sure all the countries which aspire to become national powers as super powers, they have built their own constellations. And they track the movements of any objects in the outer space using their satellite networks. So it could be even our own missile tracking or even our own ballistic missile defense shield or anything. All of them depend on usage of satellite networks. What if the Chinese have blinded your satellite networks? You have zero visibility on any attack. I know most of the times we have our own over-the-head radars and all that, yes, but they have a limited range. So you won't be able to anticipate an attack. This is scenario number one. Now, scenario number two, what Chinese have cleverly done in this is, they have demonstrated that nobody can control this space. This space is available for who is the winner. That's another thing that they have demonstrated to the world. Now, what type of response that as a emerging country or as emerging superpower that we should build eventually is to intercept their telemetry, to be able to understand what type of communication, what type of pattern that they have chosen. Because at the end of the day, even if you look at the hypersonic vehicle movements or anything, they are also reaction of a nature. You have some planning, some amount of effort. When do you leave the device? So that type of capabilities need to be built today. Because if you don't build those type of capabilities today, you will not have any say in things coming to future. Just taking a point from what Dr. Pavan Duggal said, today everybody is comfortable being uncomfortable about the international cyber law. I foresee something like nuclear non-proliferation treaty or a CTBT type of treaty coming up in this space too in coming future. So everybody's in a hurry to quickly shore up whatever they can. And once they say, okay, this is it, nobody else will do it again. Only we will do. This is the new P5 or new, whatever countries that are going to get made. So as a country with a genuine national interest, which has substantial amount of where at least 1/6 or 1/5 of the world lives, we have our own requirements to foresee this and plan in advance. And our planning will start by understanding how satellites are controlled, how satellites are navigated, how satellite assets are managed. And first, now the roots of the cyber frameworks that we are talking about also lie in this understanding. So at various stages, now one stage could be, sir, where we have supply chain issues. We import sensors. Are they tested? Do they have any backdoors? I mean, this is how the basics of the cybersecurity framework for protecting our satellite infrastructure starts. Second, you're running a payload, you're running a tracking system, you're importing a radar. Is it certified? Has someone seen it? We have standards like common criteria. Now we should play an active role in ensuring that, because we can't build all those labs in India. So these sort of challenges needs to be overcome. And the base can be built on the existing legal framework of critical information infrastructure, which will allow the government to ask private sector, even foreign vendors who are selling to us, to stick to certain minimum standards, so that we are reasonably sure of our space infrastructure safety and security. Sir?
So that's nice. In fact, the way you talked about the sensors and how we need to sort of get the regulation around that. So when Dr. Pavan said the world is in a sleeping mode, I'm finding that even this room is slightly in a sleeping mode. I just want to remind you that we're just 15 minutes away from closing the session. So should you have some questions, you should raise your hand now, so that, yes sir, I think I would like to give you the first chance before I ask my question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Paul Fevre. I'm from the Satellite Applications Catapult in the UK. My background is several decades in space. I used to work at Inmarsat. I was there for 20 years designing the end-to-end systems. And one of the things we were really conscious of is the need for business continuity purposes to protect the satellites. When I joined the Catapult 10 years ago, what we were witnessing was the start of the democratization of space, the academic systems and the small satellites. And what I witnessed was a little bit shocking to me at the time, which is that the consideration with regard to the cyber security aspects for operational things were not kind of baked in to those systems. Over the last few years, what we've done is attempted to introduce some degree of cyber hygiene into that community. Actually, what was discovering that even in the UK, at that time, the licensing for access to space had space collision consideration, but nothing with regard to what have you done to build your system to a degree of compliance, at least, and assurance with regard to is it vulnerable to attack. And that's changing, but I don't believe it's changing fast enough. My particular question here is something else that is witnessed, because you've mentioned the fact that all of the satellites could be a weapon, and it might not be state on state. It might be assets being held to ransom. Okay, every single satellite could be a weapon in this respect if it's maneuvered inappropriately. What we're seeing is the aspect of licensing for access to space being flag state considerations. It's much easier to get a license somewhere else to put your assets in space. And therefore, there may not be the degree of cleanliness and cyber health there. do you consider, as a panel, that it's necessary for us to put at the international stage at least some minimum standards with regard to any assets that are licensed to go into space to have some degree of cyber health?
I completely agree with you. We need to have those common rights duties set up. But let's look at where the world is right now. Only this month, the European Union is now debating a new cyber resilience model where they're only focusing on cybersecurity parameters for IoT. But now space is much, much bigger. But I think once I'm going to put up any of my asset on space, I need to be straddled with certain minimum responsibilities of space hygiene, of cybersecurity standards, but that can only come either through persuasion or through the mandate of law. Persuasion never works. So it has to ultimately come through mandate of law, which then will again be dependent on what kind of dedicated legal frameworks would countries want to have to mandate minimum parameters of cybersecurity before you can put up your assets or your items in space. I think the world is still pretty much far ahead from this. This is the ideal world which should be happening, because ultimately imagine the scenario, you put up your sat in space. I use my sat for the purposes of doing a ransomware attack on you, and your satellite gets completely blocked out. And till such time, we don't even know what kind of payments are going to be made. Would it be made via bitcoins or new emerging cryptos in the dark net, or would it be something else? So I think we'll have a common responsibility upon ourselves to ensure that the cybersecurity of space as a paradigm is protected. But that will have to come, I believe, through the mandate of law, which I think the nations are pretty behind the curve as far as I can see. But anyone else?
Yeah. So Dr. Chetwani, would you like to talk a little bit about the best practices in this and probably address a part of the question that has been just raised?
So we need some of the best practices to be worked out, especially for the players, the startups, and the players who are entering this field now. And we already talked of, just now we were talking about interception. Dr. Sai talked of interception of telemetry. So we need to have a encryption of command and control between ground and satellite. But having just encryption is not sufficient. There is a lot involved in it. There is a lot of key management issues, whether the security is adequate, whether the keys are changed at intervals and things like that. Then another aspect is the use of segmented approach while designing the subsystems on board, so that vulnerability of one subsystem doesn't affect the other subsystem. That is another one. And then there was a discussion about the application. So how you isolate the downloaded data from the data processing software which does it. So there are ways how to build interfaces where you can isolate these two networks, where data processing happens and where the downloaded data is stored. Now these questions can be answered by building some practical, usable and repeatable reference architecture, which these companies, these new startups or the new entrants, specifically in context of India, where new entrants are getting into the space sector, so that we have modular approach for easy replacement, which is standard based and it is international standards based. These implementations should act as reference architecture, where we can build, we should have some configuration details, some sample implementation, some tutorials which can be used. And there has to be availability of COTS components. Now when we say that we have to have isolation between a trusted network and a relatively less trusted network, we have data diodes which are available in the market, but are they cost effective? Are they modular? Are they some standards based or not? These issues. So once these reference architecture is designed and it is made available, and if more and more players start using this volume of scale can bring down the cost of this interfacing equipment like data diodes. But then there are additional risks which come from irregular patching. Software patching is an issue which is not being addressed. I already talked of inadequate encryption, and also whether audits are being carried out. Dr. Sai spoke of audits earlier, that audits need to be carried out. And then this requires that we have to train the cybersecurity manpower and ensure that these audits are carried out to see that the space assets are adequately secured. Another aspect of all this is the information sharing, where the information sharing between all the participants in space sector of the pre-attack information, post-attack information, so that information sharing or analysis centers need to be created, where all the space participants can be benefited by that. And this requires participation of government, industry, both the who are into the manufacturing as well as those who are involved in ground station related activities, OEMs, and also legal experts are required. Academia is required to participate so that we can create some kind of best practices, collaborative environment where this information can be shared and made use of. And here also comes another aspect is international collaboration. So the best practices need not be limited, because now players are, some of the startups are seeded in some other country and then they are participating in space sector in another country. So these has to be international collaboration as well as international based standards. And as Dr. Pavan Duggal said, that more of collaboration, cooperation is required in this field.
Thank you, sir. I think that was very good. And all that I need to tell you is you've been a fantastic audience. And that's also because I think we are sitting after lunch. Oh, there are two questions. I'm running short of time. Very quickly, ma'am, your question first, and then, yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. So I was just referring back to the Antarctic reference, the Global Commons reference that you made during your talk. And I was just wondering why Antarctic and why not maritime law? Because maritime law, UNCLOS covers a lot of liability, and there are a lot of case laws also that we can refer back to. So I was just wondering why we did that.
So I'll take one more question. Can you just give the, yeah.
Okay. So my question is, like you say, that we need to enact laws, cyber laws, but any law will be effective only if there is a law enforcing agency. So who do you think is going to be the policeman in this scenario? And as I see, we say China has enacted some law, Vietnam has enacted some law, but USA, for example, has 65% of its assets in space. Is it really bothered about enacting some space laws, or is it conveniently silent so that in the absence of laws you can do whatever you wish to? Thank you.
Can I take another question very quickly? We're going to answer all of them together. Okay, you've been a very good audience. Thank you very much. And we're going to talk about, we've talked a lot about the laws. We've talked about the regulatory framework, the best practices. And I think we need to talk about the security by design and not security as an afterthought. And that should be important from the time you build up a satellite. We need to also have implement a supply chain risk management system and ensure that the supply chain is pretty robust, and there are a number of security elements. So ladies and gentlemen, all that is left for me is to invite our chair, Dr. Gulshan Rai, to give his closing remarks, and also during that address the two questions that have come up. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So briefly answering the question that he has asked, I was about to say that. So maritime laws will be a very great standard to understand the common, because because if you put any bug or is there any attack on your cyber infrastructure in space, the risk will be borne by anybody. It can be anybody. You don't know where the satellite is crashing. It can be crashing anywhere. So probably I think the maritime could be thing. With that, sir, thank you.
Thank you, Sai. Thank you, Colonel Kuber, for giving me the final opportunity to speak to my friends. Friends, let me conclude this session by trying to attempt and putting a different aspect to the questions which had been raised by the audience there. I'll start what Mr. Pavan Duggal said it, that there is a space law, and I think there was a session in this conference also on a space law there. But the space law does not take into account the cyber law, cyber aspect, which my friend Pavan Duggal mentioned about it. And as I said, the cyber is the domain which is controlling everything. So is the case with space law, that they're controlling the space laws, also they're controlling it there. I think Mr. Chetwani will bear with me. There is a UN body called IFB, International Frequency Regulation Board. Basically, they regulate the slots and they regulate to some extent of the frequency of the satellites there. And as we know, we have three types of the satellites there. One is the geostationary, where everyone is talking about the things. Second is the MEO, and then third comes the LEO part of it there. The LEO is stationed somewhere around, right from 200 kilometer to somewhere around 2,000 kilometer in the space. And then the MEO 2000 to somewhere around 32,000 kilometer kind of a thing. And beyond 32,000 kilometer is the geostationary, which is, you can see it moves along the rotation of the Earth, and that's why it's called a geostationary there. Now, the IFP, what does it? It gives you only if you control parameter, the frequency, as well as they enforce certain standard that these are the satellites which should be 1, 2, 3 kind of a thing in terms of electromagnetic radiation, largely electromagnetic radiation. When we talk about all the things when the satellite falls and everybody, there is a caution there, debris, we called about the satellite debris. Largely we are worried about the large objects are there, it may cause destruction and the electromagnetic radiation which will come, am I right? That it will create a massive kind of a damage. That's what we are worried about it. Now, the space law does talk about certain aspect when you talk about the debris there. But I think today, the entire space, as Mr. Duggal has said, is a global common. I mean, unlike a sea, where up to 200 kilometers in the sea, the respective country has a boundary, the border, but high sea, there is no boundary, and that's why many of the businessmen, they do high sea sail to evade the customs and all kind of a thing. That part is there. Unfortunately, in the space, there is no such kind of a phenomena that is my area or that area, because even if a satellite is moving on a Chinese space there, I mean, there are many other satellites moving. The moment you allow the frequency and you allow the slots to the particular satellite there, it is taken that whichever space it's moving, Chinese or Indian or American or wherever, is all allowed there, because it's not a one person who allows it. It's a nation which hits out, and there's a common consensus they allow the thing. So it's accepted universally that this is a common space and everybody moves it, unlike the sea, where beyond 200 kilometers you are free to do, and we have seen the case of Italian Marine, where a criminal case happens and they went away, and I think sometime Mr. Duggal can talk about that. But the cyber has introduced a different kind of angles there. The best practices are there when you're talking about creating this, manufacturing or assembling a satellite. There are norms and regulation when you talk about each component, security, electromagnetic radiations, all kind of things are there. But what happens when it goes to the space there? Because misuse are happening. We need to distinguish between the electronic warfare, which is the jamming, electromagnetic warfare, and we need to distinguish between the cyber warfare. The two different subjects are there. That's a different issue, that the software will be used for jamming also there. But then it's a jamming, you're blocking the frequency of this particular satellite there. And in the cyber warfare, you are really hacking the cyber systems inside it and trying to manipulate the satellite, which you can do from the ground station. Yeah. And that's where I come, Mr. Chetwani, Dr. Chetwani was talking about, and Sai was talking about it. encryption is only a privacy kind of a thing. Encryption does not give you security. If I hack your ground station, if I hack your, what is a satellite? It's basically circuitries are there. What is a transponder? It's the switches and circuitry is there. It's the reflection. The wave goes and comes back reflection there. They reflect it back there. So if somehow, and those circuitries are nothing but a cyber system there. If somehow the software, as I said, if I somehow manipulate the software, hack the software, because there is no software which is 100% secure there. We keep on making secure by virtue of updates and version updates, and that's why we keep on enhancing the resiliency. We don't make it 100% secure. If somehow we hack the software there, whether to the ground station or to the satellite, encryption will not help me, because that will travel as such like this. As such, it will travel like this. Like a COVID, if I have caught the COVID, and if Sai is sitting with me, if I some sort of cough, he will catch it, no matter whatever may happen there. So I think, this is a very complex, evolving kind of a subject. There are certain basic norms are there. As my friend has said, who is the police agency? Who is the policeman to control? It's very difficult to say. We are not able to control on the high sea, which is a much understood subject for years together. Space has started exploring now. We have not been able to control, as I said in my opening remarks, we have been trying to negotiate norms of behavior since 2001. Pavan has attended many meetings represented in India there. We have agreed in only small part of it. We have not even agreed that in the cyber warfare, we will not attack each other kind of a critical sector, which Sai mentioned about it. We have not said that. Look at the Ukrainian-Russian war, how the civilian infrastructure power system has been damaged. The same power is used by the army and by the civilian also there. So in cyber, which is not electromagnetic radiation, there is no kind of electromagnetic jamming there. We find difficult there. But in the space, it's going to be jamming, it's going to be cyber war there. I think the issues are much more complex. As we move up and up, issues become complex. And then, what Pavan said in the original remark, issue of international law. International law prevails only on the land. International law does not prevail on the space. Let us say 40,000 kilometer, all forget about the 2,000 kilometer up. It doesn't prevail. International law is not there at all. The international law does not address that, which is controlled by space law. And as I said, space laws need to be modified in view of the cyber and the technology kind of activity. It's a very important subject, and I think as the time folds on, we'll be getting more and more things will come to our mind, and more and more intrigue questions will come to the mind, all of us will there. But at the end, it's very, very important. Friends, you have I'll give you a very, very simple example. Most of us use the Netflix, most of us may be using the Amazon Prime or the whatever the OTT platform you're talking about. Ultimately, how do you access the OTT platform? OTT platform you access by that kind of a stick, which is nothing but a Wi-Fi stick. Hardly any security is there on the Wi-Fi on the Fire Stick. If some intruder enters through the Wi-Fi, and it must be, it gets through your Netflix system, it goes to the satellite. Look at what kind of a chain reaction it may happen. It becomes a mind-boggling at some time to think it. The simple Fire Stick can create issue for the space there. And I'll give you a living example if you go to the internet website. In 2016, I'll take only 2 minutes. In 2016, what I'm talking about Fire Stick is not something which is unimaginable. I'm giving a live example which happened in the world. In 2016, suddenly a commotion happened. The red lights were made in the California part of it. That entire part of in the western coast, in entire California, the entire red lights came to the grinding halt. The substation of the power came to grinding halt. When they investigated it, it found that if a mother, she went to the market, she had a baby, 1 year old, and she put a baby monitor, baby was sleeping, put a baby monitor, And she went to the nearby market to buy that. The range was almost baby monitor, 1 kilometer range was there. And baby monitor was getting through the DSL modem kind of a connectivity there. There was a hacker. It intruded to the DSL modem. DSL model went to the power station and the internet companies, and then the whole light was there. If you go through the case in the internet, you will find what I am saying. Entering into the fire for your fire stick is a Wi-Fi, and then entering into the OTT platform and then go to satellite, because ultimately through satellite things are coming up there, or somewhere satellite medium will be there. All are connected. Today we are connected on heterogeneous elements in the cyber there. So those situations are not something which you can't imagine. Those things are imaginable. So friends, the subject is becoming more challenging, more complex. And as I said, cyber domain is the most difficult domain because it's not a natural domain. It's a man-made domain there, and we define more protocol. We are going on a virtualized environment and all kinds of things becoming very, very important issues there. And the time will answer. Time will answer. And I am sure, I wish that my friend Duggal, Pavan Duggal, took 25 years ago the decision to get into the technology law. It's a wonderful decision there because the subject is becoming more complex and not many experts like him will be there in the market. Thank you very much. With this, I conclude this session. I thank my panelists. I thank the moderator for moderating a beautiful, a wonderful discussions there, which is as complex and more practical aspect there. I think his own moderation, he did in such a manner that some of my colleagues who were dozing off after taking their sumptuous lunch, he waked them up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear panelists. At the same